As a historian, okay, I always have dates on my mind and events, you know, and people and places, you know, things like that, right? I teach history, so these things are always in my mind. Okay, oh, this year, this happened that year, and this happened this year, and all that, and wow, it's been 100 years since this happened, you know. So earlier this year, I was thinking, well, you know, this year marks 175 years of organized Catholic worship in the city of Lawrence, okay, beginning with the arrival of the Irish immigrants here, the Irish Catholic immigrants in the mid to late 1840s. So I'm thinking, yeah, that would make, you know, a good topic for a discussion and for research, and then I'll present it in various venues, including over here. And I'm not done yet, so what we'll be going over today is just preliminary research. I'm still looking into things. So just so you know, on the tentative plan is on Sunday, September 26th, okay, at 2:30 in the afternoon. I will be giving a similar talk here on what I'll be talking about today, but the September 26th talk will include some additional information from research that I'm still doing right now. Okay, so it'll be an expanded talk. And then for the month of October, just so you know, in the gallery over there, we have a gallery here with changing exhibits. So for the month of October, myself, in conjunction with the Lawrence History Center on Essex Street, we will have an exhibit set up in there on the Catholic Church history in Lawrence, or of Lawrence, mainly some artifacts, okay, gathered from various places here in Lawrence that will depict or give examples of church history here in Lawrence, okay. Now to tease you, for today, I have a little mini version. When we're done with the discussion here today, before you leave, if you'd like to take a look, I have some artifacts from my own historical collection at home that I put on display up there, all right? And in October, it'll be an expanded version of that, because then I'll be borrowing some items from the Lawrence History Center as well, that again we'll have set up in the gallery over there, all right? So I hope, you know, to see you all again on September 26th, if you're able to come on Sunday afternoon, and then, or the month of October to take a look at the exhibit on church artifacts here from Lawrence that will be on display there in the gallery. Okay, so, all right. So what we're looking at here is my research that I tried to organize and present to you today on church history in Lawrence. All right. So now what I did is I sort of backed up a little rather than immediately launch into it. Okay. So I backed up and I provided some what I think is important background information on Catholicism and how it worked its way into Massachusetts and New England, what happened, okay, while it was trying to get established here, all right? So I won't read it word for word, but I'll go over some of it with you, and then, you know, I hope if you have time at home after, you can read it better, okay? And then if you have any questions or comments about it, you know, feel free to contact me here at Lawrence Heritage, okay? So basically, and again, I'll just bounce around here, but, you know, hopefully you'll have a chance to read it better on your own time. But basically, in the 1600s, Jesuits, the Society of Jesus, founded by St. Ignatius Loyola, they were banned from the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Okay, why? Well, you know, the good old English Puritans, right, who were inhabiting our neck of the woods here early on, okay, they just basically did not like the Jesuits simply because they were Catholic, okay? Just because they had S.J., you know, after their name, oh, that's it, you know, Satan or whatever, you know what I mean, okay? So those English Puritans had no use for the Jesuit priests here. And they thought, you know, Catholicism was idolatrous blasphemy, and that Catholics were destined for eternal damnation. All right, so, oh my God, you know, it's like, whew. All right, those English Puritans, they certainly didn't hold back, did they? Okay, yeah, all right. So, now, tied into this whole story, all right, is the fact that France and England, of course, at that time, were in a struggle, you know, some very pitched battles for control of land here in North America, okay? So the Jesuit missionaries had converted a large number of Native Americans to Catholicism, all right? And therefore, in the process, they became potential allies now, all right, of the French, okay? So, and most of the Native Americans here in New England did team up with the French in their battle against the English for control of land, okay? Not all of them. Some Native American tribes aligned themselves with the, and depending where they were living, that played a big part, aligned themselves with the English, but most of the Native American tribes aligned themselves with the French, okay? And especially now they were converted to Catholicism, so they were drawn even closer now and sympathized more with the French in their battle against the English, okay? So during the colonial period in Boston, the number of Catholics began growing, okay? And by the way, no Jesuit was actually executed for defying the ban, all right? But again, that anti-Catholic legacy endured here, though, for generations. So during the colonial era, you know, Paul Revere and all that, right? Okay, remember your U.S. history, okay, I'm sure. So the number of Catholics now began growing with the growing of the population, okay, and more immigration taking place now. Okay? And get this, in 1732, a newspaper reported that an Irish priest had celebrated Mass in Boston for some of his own nation, okay, on St. Patrick's Day, all right, some of his own nation. So what do you think that means, right? The Irish, right, okay? So, but very appropriate on St. Patrick's Day, right? You know, so can't argue with that, okay? All right. So, and Bostonians now are alarmed at all this Catholicism and signs of growing Catholicism taking place now in Boston, okay? So the governor ordered the sheriff and constables to actually break into people's homes and shops and arrest any, and get this, popish priest and other papists of his faith and persuasion.
Do you know what governor was?
Okay, I believe it was John Winthrop, I think. Okay, I'll have to check on that, but I think it was John Winthrop, but don't quote me on that. So yeah, popish priests and other papists of his faith and persuasion. They certainly had a way with words, right? You know? So, and Harvard was actually sponsoring lectures, okay, against popery. All right, so if you were prepared to speak against the Catholic Church, well, Harvard wants you. They want you to speak there. All right, perfect. You're the kind of speaker they're looking for at the time there in Harvard. All right. So now, at the same time, what was happening? The American Revolution, right? We were fighting for our independence from Great Britain. Well, all this, you know, supposed popery was going on here in our neck of the woods. So. So the French, who the Marquis de Lafayette got to help aid the colonists in their struggle against Great Britain, okay? And actually, just a little sidebar here. The Marquis de Lafayette, a French aristocrat and military officer, he was very instrumental in helping the colonists win the American Revolution, okay? Because he convinced King Louis to send troops, like 6,000 French troops and supplies to aid the American colonists here, okay? So if it wasn't for the French, you know, we might still have a British accent here today. You never know, right? Okay, we'd all be speaking with a British accent. So, but however, so the American Revolution now was forcing Massachusetts basically to change its views of Catholics, all right? Why? Well, again, that alliance there, alliances are important, right? Throughout history, alliances have been very important, right? A lot of kings and queens, like in Europe, for example, with the marriages of their children, created and cemented these alliances, okay, that helped them, you know, grow and secure their empires, okay? So, So the desire for victory over Britain on the part of the colonists, many of them WASPs, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, got them to what we would say today, turn down the temperature, right? We hear that expression a lot today. As we would say today, with their Catholic allies and unify against the British, okay? So even though, you know, the colonists were WASPs mainly, okay? Again, ultimately, what did they want, though? Victory over Britain, okay? So they put aside their feelings there, their anti-Catholic feelings, okay, and unified against the British, okay? So now, after the Revolutionary War ended, a lot of those French troops that were sent here by the Marquis de Lafayette to help the colonists ended up staying in Boston. Okay, they just, you know, for different reasons, they had no desire to go back to France. So they ended up staying here in the colonies in Boston. Okay, therefore, they formed the first cohort of the Catholic congregation in New England. Okay, France then and still now, mainly a Catholic country, all right? So a lot of those French soldiers who fought during the American Revolution, being Catholic, stayed here, as I said, after the war ended. And again, they formed the core, right, of the first Catholic congregation in New England. So Mass, right, so you can see this coming, right? So now we have this core of the French Catholics here growing, having begun by the soldiers, okay? So Mass now was celebrated publicly in Boston for the first time on November 1st, All Saints Day, right? 1788. All right, big milestone there in the history of Boston and in the history of Catholicism here in New England. So by the early 1790s, George Washington, of course, president by this time, it was estimated there were over 100 Catholics living in Boston. Wow, right, 100. Okay, but you have to put things in proportion, right? Back then, the population was, of course, much smaller than it is today, right? Okay. So from there, the Catholic Church took root in New England, okay? And the early 1800s come along. Wow, we're up to 500 Catholics now in Boston, okay? And it was decided, because the Catholic population was growing and growing, that Boston now should have its own bishop, okay, to lead this flock now, this Catholic flock here in Boston, and create the Boston Archdiocese, okay? So April 1808, Reverend John Louis de Chevreuse was appointed the first bishop of Boston. Okay, and I know nowadays, you know, Cardinal O'Malley and his predecessors, I believe it's yearly, they give out a Chevreuse Award, right, for Catholics. You can be nominated, you know, Catholics who are very active, do a lot of work in their parish, and you can get nominated, and you get the Chevreuse Award there in Boston, so that's good. Bishop Chevreuse's legacy now is continuing. So, however, now, the anti-Catholic sentiment did not disappear with the growth of the Catholic population, okay? Why? Well, at this time now, the mid to late 1800s, the huge wave of Irish immigration was happening in America here, right? With a lot of them coming here to Lawrence. So this actually brought a renewal of prejudice, discrimination, and even violence against Catholics. And it would be more than a century before the anti-Catholic sentiment would finally begin to fade with John F. Kennedy now becoming president right here from Massachusetts. All right, our first Catholic president, Joe Biden, the current president, being the second Catholic president that we've had. Okay. So, but you know, Kennedy, as you may know, didn't have an easy time though, right? He had to go down to Houston, right, September 12th, 1960, I believe it was, give a big speech down there about why it was okay to elect a Catholic president, right? Because, you know, when Al Smith, another Catholic, ran in 1928, okay, when John C. Fremont, who gave indications that he was Catholic when he ran in 1856. The opposition, when these people ran for president, the opposition was like putting out this these dire warnings that there would be this tunnel, right? Picture it, right? A big tunnel dug from the Vatican, right? Okay, all the way to the United States here, right? Okay, so if we elected John C. Fremont and Al Smith, and John F. Kennedy, they would all be taking direction from the Pope, right? From the Vatican through that, there'd be that tunnel somehow from the Vatican, to the United States here, right? Okay, but right, how politics can be, okay? So they'll throw anything out there, all right? And even today, of course, we see that, right? Okay, so before I switch to, so I wanted to give you that background information first on Catholicism in New England, all right? So before we launch directly into Lawrence now, does anybody have any questions or comments they'd like to make about what I've said so far? Yes?
What indication was it that John C. Fremont was Catholic?
Oh, okay.
I never heard that before.
Sure, okay. Yeah, now John C. Fremont was the first Republican candidate for president that we had in American history, okay, because the Republican Party was formed in 1854, okay, by the merger of the Free Soil Party, the Whigs, and the anti-slavery Democrats, or Democratic Party, okay? So John C. Fremont now, the Pathfinder he was called, right? He was famous for exploring the West, okay? The Republicans nominated him in 1856 to go up against the Democrat, James Buchanan, all right? Now, all right. Now, see, back then, of course, in the 1850s, when we had the Know Nothing Party, right, also known as the American Party, that anti-immigrant, anti-Catholic party, okay? So back then, if there was any hint of you being Catholic and you're running for president, okay, you had to like fight off all these accusations, like John Fremont, okay? So some people were accusing him of being Catholic, that he was like a secret Catholic, because he got married by a priest, okay? And I believe because his sister was a nun, or some relative, I think his sister was a Catholic nun, all right? So, Fremont, he's a Catholic, we can't elect him, he's just gonna let in more Catholics and more immigrants into our country, okay? So, so it worked, okay? Now, there were other issues at play that year, of course, okay? But all that worked against Fremont, and the Democrat, James Buchanan, was elected president that year, okay? So, and I think Fremont, another thing too that scared people, I think he sent his children to parochial school, something like that as well, okay, which provided fodder, for the Democrats there to say all these negative things about Fremont and his supposed alignment with the Catholic Church, okay, so. Okay, any other questions or comments before I get into Lawrence itself now? Nope, okay. All right, so the beginnings of organized Catholic worship in Lawrence. Okay, so now the church history here in Lawrence really began with its founding in the mid to late 1840s, okay? So much so that by the time we got to World War I, there were actually 43 established churches in Lawrence, okay? And we're not that big here, right? We're about 7 square miles, okay? Because as you may know, we were carved out of Andover and Methuen, right? Okay, so we're only about 7 square miles. Granted, back then the population was a lot less than today. Today it's about 80,000, okay? Very high density here, right? Okay, but lots of churches here, okay? And they all began pretty much simultaneously, too, with the founding of the city. Baptists, Catholics, Congregationalists, Methodists, Unitarians, Universalists, okay? All established here by 1850, all right? And that was only after the first few years of getting underway here in Lawrence, of the city being developed, okay? So, and pioneers in the religious life of the community, all right? Back then, for example, we didn't have like, the social safety net, let's say, that we have today, okay? The welfare state, if you will, okay? So churches back then played a big role in helping to care for the indigent and the poor and those in need, okay? So, and like, for example, during the Bread and Roses strike, okay? So, so the Catholic churches had a lot of influence here, and especially in the early days in the city, and they provided a lot of assistance to people, okay? Like during the strikes that we had here, like the Bread and Roses strike, okay? So, now, as far as the specific date that the first Catholic Mass was celebrated in Lawrence, we don't have a recording of that, okay? But you know, bugs, you know what, out of us historians, right? Okay, when I can't find a specific date for something, it drives me up the wall, okay? All right, but sometimes we have to just, you know, in general, we could say, well, this is when this happened, okay? Now, you know, back then, they didn't really keep any records, right? No computers back then. Yes, there was paper and pencil, right? Okay, or a version of that. But still, back in the 1800s, you know, yeah, records were kept, but it wasn't like today, okay, that everything's recorded, right? Okay, so it wasn't written down, oh, the first Mass in Lawrence occurred on this day at this time, all right? So, so we don't know the exact date, all right, but I'm working up to that. All right, so what did Catholics do here in Lawrence then at the very beginning? Well, something probably none of us would want or be able to do today, but they walked to Lowell to attend Mass, okay? Like 11, 12 miles downriver from here, okay? So, see, Lowell was developed like 20 years before Lawrence, okay? Lawrence was sort of modeled after Lowell as far as developing this great textile manufacturing center, okay? So Lowell had, for example, St. Patrick's Church by the 1820s, okay? So you're a Catholic in Lawrence in the middle of the 1840s, okay? There's no churches here yet, all right? What do? Well, if you're up to it, you walk the 10, 11, 12 miles to St. Patrick's in Lowell to attend Mass, okay? So, all right, and page 4 now. So, when the Catholic population here now began growing, especially with the arrival of the Irish Catholic immigrants, okay, due to the potato famine in Ireland, there was a Father McDermott who I was able to locate, well, not personally, of course, but in records, okay. The poor guy is long gone now, but I located his name in some research that I've been doing. And he was at St. Pat's in Lowell, and he would come to Lawrence on occasions, and was probably, from what we can determine, was probably the first priest to celebrate Mass in Lawrence. Okay, this Father McDermott from St. Patrick's in Lowell. All right. So his first actual Mass here in Lawrence was likely, okay, so we got to keep the door open a little, right? Okay, but likely, from what we can determine, celebrated at the home of a Michael Murphy, right, in a shanty, all right, which, as you may know, we had on actually both sides of the Merrimack River, right? We had them right beyond the dam there, in the St. Patrick's neighborhood in South Lawrence, okay? That was the Irish shanty there, but one of them, and like where the water treatment plant is, Shattuck Street, right, South Broadway there, Kingston Street, okay? And then we also had Irish shanties on the north side of the river, where we are over here, in what's known as the Plains neighborhood, you know, where the Green's Funeral Home is, Lawrence High School, St. Anthony's Church, right, that whole area was an Irish shanty as well, okay? So there was a Michael Murphy, who was living at what is now 7 Newton Street on South Broadway, and Father McDermott likely celebrated the first Mass in Mr. Murphy's home, okay, here in Lawrence, either in December of 1845 or early January of 1846. Again, we can't pin it down, they didn't keep records, okay, but from what we can determine, what was talked about back then, okay, this is likely what happened. So, now, Father Charles French, and that's the correct spelling with 2 F's. I know it looks odd, but that's the correct spelling. From Ireland, okay. He came to the U.S. in the early 1800s, eventually worked his way up to Lawrence, okay, came here in April of 1846, and not in good health, but he began preaching in the homes of the Irish. Why? No church, no Catholic church here in Lawrence, all right? So what's a Catholic priest going to do? Well, preach in the homes of the faithful, all right, those who desired to hear Mass, all right? So he became the first clergyman of any denomination in Lawrence to actually purchase land for a church building, okay? So in a few months, he got the Immaculate Conception Church going on Chestnut Street, okay? Small wooden structure, okay, more like a chapel, you could say, okay, right near White Street. And that became the very first Catholic church in Lawrence, okay? So the Immaculate Conception Church, Chestnut near White Street, okay? And regular services were held there beginning in October of 1846. The consecration took place the following month, okay? Now, only 2 years later, in 1848, 1/3 of the population of Lawrence was naturally Catholic in religious tendency. So, wow, it is zooming up here, right? Both the population was zooming up and the Catholic proportion of that population was zooming up, okay? Why? Well, the Irish Catholic immigrants, right? They were fueling most of this population growth here, and at the same time, the growth of the Catholic population as well, okay? So, yes?
What number would that be?
Okay, 6,000, okay? By 1848, we had 6,000 Irish Catholics here in Lawrence, okay? So, all right, so in a short space of time, that little chapel there, the Immaculate Conception Church, okay, could only hold 1/2 of the people who wanted to attend Mass there. Okay, it was already too small, all right? So now enter Father O'Donnell from the Augustinians, 1848. He came to Lawrence now. He joined the effort here, okay, to try to serve the Catholic population. And he organized St. Mary's Parish, which we'll take a look at momentarily, okay, in this presentation here. So during this time, while Father O'Donnell was trying to organize St. Mary's Parish, he celebrated Mass in a building, one block up from here, known as Merrimack Hall, and at the corner of Jackson and Common Streets. So if you walk up 2 blocks here, you get to the Compagnon Common. It's like in front of you and to your left, okay? Right there at that intersection, there was this building. I don't know what corner it was on, but it was on one of the 4 corners there, known as Merrimack Hall, and that's where Father O'Donnell began saying Mass, and actually his first Mass was Christmas Day, very appropriate, right, in 1848, okay? So, now, our friend Father French, with the 2 F's there, continued at the Immaculate Conception for about 5 years to care for his the spiritual needs of his parishioners, and until he died on January 6, 1851. As you may know, that's the Feast of the Epiphany, right? What an interesting day for Father French to die on, right? Okay, on the Feast of the Epiphany. Very interesting. And he was succeeded by a Father James Taff. Yes, and that's the correct spelling, 2 A's. It's not a typo, okay? I mean, I practice when I preach. I tell my students, I come down hard on them for spelling. Actually, and by a little sidebar here, when I was growing up in Lawrence, I grew up in Prospect Hill. I went to the Star Row in the Rollins. You'll all be happy to know that in the 4th grade at the Rollins School on Howard Street, I was the 4th grade spelling champion. Okay, so, all right. Thank you. So Father Taft, this is how he spelled his name. Okay, he was a Dominican friar, also from Ireland, and he came to Lawrence in October 1850. Okay, sir, question.
Yes, I just had a quick question. Were the Augustinians the first religious order to service the Merrimack Valley, or was Father McDermott or Father Frank, or were there any other associated groups there?
Okay, yes, the Augustinians and the Dominicans both arrived here around the same time. Okay, 1848. The Augustinians arrived, and that was around the same time that Father Taft, a Dominican, came as well, the very late 1840s, 1850. So the first 2 religious orders here, and about like simultaneously, were OSA, the Order of St. Augustine, and the Dominicans. So, okay. Yes, Mary.
Do you know if those religious were American born or were they foreign born?
Were they, I'm sorry?
Foreign born or American born?
Foreign born. The first ones were foreign born, okay? Like Father Taft of the Dominicans, foreign born. And I believe some of the OSAs would have been foreign born, the first ones, okay? And then as, the population was established here and grew in the US, then we had more natural born American priests beginning to serve our country, the spiritual needs of the Catholic population. So, okay, you're welcome. All right, so Father Taft now takes over the Immaculate Conception, that small wooden chapel there on White Street. Okay, so now he realizes he needs a bigger church there. Okay, so a bigger one is completed right near the site of the original wooden one. Right, 1854, dedicated 1855. All right, and then 20 years later, that parish was given to the Augustinians to run by Archbishop Williams of Boston. Okay, who I believe has a high school named after him now in Brockton, Archbishop Williams High School, okay, a Catholic high school. All right. So through the efforts of Father Taft, the Protectory of the Mary Immaculate, which is standing there today, as you may know, on Bennington and White Streets there, okay, it started out as a home for orphans and invalids, okay, so Father Taft got that going, and that became the very first charitable institution erected in Lawrence, okay, and completed, dedicated 1868, ran continuously until 1954, when it received its nursing home status, which of course, that's what it is today, right? The Mary Immaculate Healthcare Services Network, right? Yeah, there's a nursing home there, there's an assisted living portion there, and there's independent apartments there for the elderly as well, okay, if you don't need any assistance. All right, so now, the Immaculate Conception Church was the oldest Catholic church in Lawrence until it was torn down on November 7th, 1991, due to badly needed repairs, $175,000 worth, okay, which you can imagine in today's dollars, right, that'd be even much higher. And then I listed, through my research, I thought you might want to know, because I'm like, all right, somebody's going to ask me, okay, what was some of those badly needed repairs, right? So I'm like, okay, I'm going to mention, okay, see, X, Y, and Z, these were the badly needed repairs. So if you were thinking of asking me that, I headed you off on a pass, right? Okay, so the last Mass at the Immaculate Conception Church was celebrated on Sunday, September 22nd, 1991 at 11:30 a.m., the 11:30 Mass, okay, and then sadly it closed. A lot of the Hispanic parishioners that were going there, they moved into the now closed St. Anne's Church on Havel Street, okay, and the Immaculate Conception had actually been closed once before, and then the Hispanics, it was given over to the Hispanic Catholic community in Lawrence in 71 until it closed in 91. Okay, so yes, questions and comments, we'll take a little break. Yeah.
Do you know the date when the actual brick Immaculate Conception was built?
Yes.
The wood to the brick.
Okay, yes, okay, I think, let me see, I think I have that in here. Okay, 1854 is when the brick church that some of you knew that was torn down in 1991 was built. Okay, so on page 5, the first bullet there, in 1854.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, see, okay, yeah, okay, so, yeah, sure. So the brick church that some of you knew here in Lawrence was built in 1854 and then raised in 1991, so. Okay, any other questions, comments before I, yes, Mary?
The Father McDermott was St. Patrick's in Lowell, all right?
Mm-hmm.
What order was the
What was the order?
order?
The order. I honestly don't know. I did not see any initials after his name when I was researching him. So I honestly don't know what order he was.
Our understanding was that the Oblates, the reason they went from Florence to Lowell, was the Oblates were very, very kind and generous to the Irish Catholics, and
Yes, okay.
that's why I figured that Father McDermott
Okay.
had been one.
Perhaps.
But he came to
Okay.
Lawrence when he could.
Yes, when he could, right,
When he could.
those are the operative
So I
words there,
believe
when he
that
could.
they deserve a little recognition.
Okay, yes, thank you, Mary. Okay, yes. Yes, as some of you may know, the Oblates, the Oblate Fathers, they are based in Tewksbury, locally anyway, okay? And a little sidebar here. My very first teaching job was at Sacred Heart School in Lowell, when I got my bachelor's degree that time. And that, I remember that was run by the Order of Oblates, and I'm sure some other churches in the Lowell-Tewksbury area. But yeah, my first teaching job at Sacred Heart in Lowell, it was the Oblate Fathers that time. So, yep. So. Okay, anything else before we move on to the next segment now? Questions, comments? No? Okay. Now, what I did for you I hope is an easy-to-read format here, okay? Continuing in bullet form on page 6, snippets of history from Lawrence's Catholic churches, okay? So what I did is I listed all the, the Catholic churches that have been and are located in Lawrence. Hopefully I didn't miss any, but if somebody thinks I missed one, you can correct me. And in bullet form, I gave you highlights based on the research I did on each of them, okay? So again, I won't go through each one word for word, but, you know, at home, you know, on your own time, if you'd like to take a better look at this, and then just, you know, let me know if you have any questions or comments. You can contact me here or come by. So just briefly, the Church of the Assumption of Mary, okay? That's the one that used to be located, some of you probably knew it, at Park and Lawrence Streets, okay? That was built mainly for the German Catholic immigrants, okay? And then eventually merged into St. Mary Immaculate Conception Parish, okay, which then became St. Mary of the Assumption, all right? Today, if you drive or walk by there, it's a parking lot, all right? For the Greater Lawrence Community Health Center, which is across the street on Park Street, which used to be the old Assumption Elementary School, okay? And a little sidebar, I remember when I was a kid, Father Alfred Murphy, OSA, was the longtime pastor there at the Assumption. So I remember on Saturday mornings, he would have yard sales in the schoolyard there of the elementary school, okay? And my mother would rent a table there, you know, to get rid of some of her junk there that she had accumulated sometimes. So I remember, so my sister and I, who were kids at the time, you know, we would come along with my mother and help her set up there, and you know, greet the people there, and you know, try to make some sales there, stuff my mother no longer wanted. So, and then Father Murphy, I remember, would be walking around there sometimes and greeting everybody at each table there, you know. So I remember when they used to have those Saturday morning flea markets there. And, but you know what they say, right? One man's trash is another man's treasure, okay? So, you know, if you're into flea markets, right? So, okay, so, Holy Rosary Church, my parish that I grew up in here in Lawrence, all right, at the beginning of Essex Street, Essex and Union. So, Father Mario Milanese from Italy, okay, came here and tried to get a parish started for the new Italian arriving immigrants, okay. Now, Holy Rosary Church today on Essex Street, okay, some of you may know this, used to be called St. Lawrence O'Toole, okay. Father Milanese rented the downstairs portion there for the Italian-American population, okay, and he was leasing it, and then eventually bought it, okay, when St. Lawrence O'Toole moved from, again, what is now Holy Rosary to East Haverhill and Newbury Streets. Some of you might remember that, okay, although you have to go back to 1980 to remember it, because May of 80 is when it was torn down because of structural deficits, okay, or repairs, yes, right, okay. So
There was a church right there.
Yes, right at the V, right at the V there, right, Newbury and East Sable Street, some of you remember it, right, okay? And here's another little sidebar. So I told you my parish was Holy Rosary, okay? So when my mother told my sister and I, okay, you know, we have to go to confession now, okay? My mother didn't want to go to Holy Rosary because she's like, you know, when you go into the booth there, right, the confessional, and you start talking to the priest, right, you know, all the priests knew us there at Holy Rosary. And my mother, you know, she didn't want to be identified. She didn't want to be known when she was confessing her sins. Like, oh, you know, Father so-and-so, he's going to know it's me. He's going to recognize my voice, right, you know. So what would my mother do? She'd take us over to St. Lawrence's for confession, right, where the priest didn't know us there, so they wouldn't recognize our voices, right? Okay. And she felt more comfortable, you know, confessing her sins that way at St. Lawrence's rather than Holy Rosary, where they would know her even by her voice, without even actually being able to see her, right? They would know her voice there in the confessional. So, you know. But anyway, and so, you know, my mother now passed away a few years ago at 91, and some of you knew my parents, and my father just passed away in January this year at 98. So hopefully I have good genes. Okay. So, all right. So Father Milanese remodeled the church. Okay, it was rededicated in 1934. While he was there, the Venerini sisters, some of you maybe have heard of them or even knew them perhaps, right up on Prospect Street there behind Lawrence General. Father Milanese invited them, okay, to come here, educate people, and then in 1919, the Holy Rosary School, that's still standing vacant on Summer Street, was erected. Okay. By the way, with the air conditioning off, if anybody is getting too warm, we can open some windows. We shut it off so you can hear me better, but if anybody is warm, let me know, we can open some windows. No. No? Okay. What's that? It is a little warm, yeah, okay. Let's, excuse me for one moment. And, Now, let's see. 2004 was a big, you know, momentous, I guess you can look at it, year in Catholic Church history here in Lawrence, because, you know, in the very early 2000s, that's when the Archdiocese, for different reasons, had to merge a lot of the Catholic churches, like here in Lawrence, right? Okay, so that's how Corpus Christi Parish was created, right? Holy Rosary, St. Francis, Holy Trinity, okay, and Saints Peter and Paul all merged into Corpus Christi Parish and Holy Rosary Church, okay? So, you know, financial reasons, there was the scandal going on too at the time, okay? Church attendance, of course, was down too, all right? So decisions had to be made, and church was closing, merge was happening, like with Corpus Christi, okay? Now, St. Lucy's, actually where my wife and I got married, in Pleasant Valley, Methuen, was built as a mission church of Holy Rosary, okay? The original chapel from 1935 is still there. If you're on Merrimack Street, coming from the direction of Lawrence, on the left side before you get to the current St. Lucy's, there's that white, you can tell it's a chapel, right? That's the original St. Lucy's, okay? And then, 1958, right? 1958 is when the current structure, of course, was built and opened, okay? And became an archdiocesan parish. So, all right, Holy Trinity, identified mostly with the Polish population here in Lawrence, okay? One interesting little fact there, that I turned up in my research. Father Milanese was paying about $40 a month. Hard to imagine nowadays, right? But back then, $40 a month to use the basement of the then St. Lawrence O'Toole Church, right? Okay, which in turn helped him pay his own lease of $120 a month for the use of the same building. Okay, so the early Polish parishioners, when Holy Trinity was getting underway, okay, they worshiped in the basement of St. Lawrence O'Toole. Father Milanese collected $40 a month from them. That paid for 1/3 of his own lease that he was paying to St. Lawrence O'Toole. Okay. Sacred Heart in South Lawrence on South Broadway. Okay, started out as a mission church of St. Anne's. Okay, later became independent. Closed in 2005. Okay, today you may know perhaps that it's still open today. Now the Marist fathers left there, okay, when it closed, but today it's run by the First Order of Penance of St. Dominic, which offers the Tridentine Latin Mass. Okay, I think it's 10 a.m. on Sundays. Okay, if you drive by, there's a sign out front there in front of the church on South Broadway. Okay, so St. Anne's. Now, the original church is from the early 1870s. There's a sketch of it after if you want to see the display case there before you leave. Right near the present church. Okay, they dedicated it in 1883. Present structure goes back to 1906. However, and by the way, St. Anne's, of course, identified with the French-Canadian population. So the children received their religious ed at the Immaculate Conception Church, not far from there, before the original St. Anne's was built. Okay, closed in 1991. The vacant building now still stands there. Okay, and just awaiting some action. Okay, but you can imagine a building like that for somebody to buy it. Let's say rehabilitate it, it would cost, quite a bit of money. So, St. Anthony's on Amesbury Street, okay, the Maronite church, okay, goes back to the early 1900s. Father James O'Reilly, the longtime influential pastor, 39 years, of St. Mary's here in Lawrence, who got a lot of other parishes going for the different ethnic communities, including St. Anthony's. Okay, originally was on Elm Street. Then with urban renewal after, things got reconfigured there, and the present structure goes back to the 1970s, I believe, like the early 70s. Okay, identified with the Lebanese Syrian population here in Lawrence. St. Augustine's, Tower Hill, not Andover, but the one in Andover, that's my parish now, but the one in Lawrence here on Tower Hill, it originally was located on Water Street, okay? And in the display case after that, you'll see a sketch of the original wooden St. Augustine's Church on Water Street, okay? The first Mass was celebrated there very appropriately, Christmas Day, 1878. 1921, the church that you see now up on Tower Hill, that was built, and it actually started out as a combination church and school, okay? So the church was on the first floor, and then if you can imagine, on the second floor, they had some grades, a few grades there, grades like 1 to 3, okay? A mission church of St. Mary's, then became a separate parish. The current structure was built in the mid to late 1920s, okay, replacing the 1921 church, but all in the same area up there on Ames Street. And today now, and again, part of the reconfiguration the Archdiocese did in the early 2000s. So today now, St. Augustine's Lawrence is part of Our Lady of Good Counsel Parish, together with St. Teresa's in Methuen on Plymouth Street. Okay. St. Francis, one of the parishes formed by Father O'Reilly, to try to serve the various immigrant populations here. Bradford Street, present structure, also on Bradford Street, 1923. Today it's part of Bellissini Academy, which is a small private religious school for middle school boys and I think girls too now as well. So,
I just wanted to add
Yes,
something.
sure.
Because, my mother's parents were members of St. Francis kind of from the beginning. And when the parish closed, my wife and I were long distance parishioners, because we live in Fall River.
oh yeah,
I connected with a Lithuanian nun in Brockton
okay.
who ships containers to Lithuania. And I got permission that anything that I could get out of that building, we could ship back to Lithuania. So all the statues, vestments, anything that we could get out of that building, we got it. And so we got a second life in the churches that are reopening after the fall of communism.
Okay, yes.
So, it kind of lived on.
Yeah.
But one thing I'd like to add on how they went about doing this.
Yeah.
They actually sold the building when they were leading us to think that there was still a chance to keep it.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And when I actually got into the building, they had already started demolishing some of it to put an elevator in and everything else. I mean, it was really devastating to see the condition of the building.
Yes.
But the main thing is we got everything that we could move out of there,
Yeah.
and it was all shipped to Lithuania.
Yeah, excellent. Well, good. I guess that's a happy ending in a way.
Yeah, it is. And the fact that the building's still being used for
Yes.
a Catholic purpose.
Yes, true.
As opposed to St. Anne's,
Yeah, just
which is
a
a big
vacant
shame.
hulk, vacant hulk.
It is.
Yeah.
They also had a beautiful school, St. Francis.
Oh, yes, okay. Now, the school was on Bradford Street there as well.
And they do the same thing with Sacred Heart, though.
And Sacred Heart.
Actually, the school was on Franklin, it was the Donovan School.
Oh, the Triple Donovan School.
Yeah.
Okay, you're right,
Yeah.
yes, okay, right, okay, yes, right.
But the Sacred Heart, it's interesting to my family because the Sacred Heart in South Lawrence, of course, was Marist and very French, all right?
Yes.
And it has the most beautiful, beautiful candelabra, right? The little Sacred Heart one.
Oh,
And it went to Sacred Heart in Weymouth, which is as Irish Catholic as you could be, right? Which is ironic because Sacred Heart in Weymouth had a devastating fire. But it was one of the few churches, especially south of Boston, where there aren't too many Catholic churches, that was allowed to rebuild and reopen by the cardinal when everybody else was joining forces. So we have little roots down there. Very pleased. In fact, I went down and asked the pastor if I could have one of those little rinky-dinks that came off the chandelier. But they had already redone that way. And they're hanging very nicely. So Sacred Heart in Weymouth now has all the artifacts from Sacred Heart in Lawrence.
Including the stained glass windows.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Mostly, he was more happy with the stained glass. I just wanted the little rinky.
Okay, good. Thank you, Mary. Okay, we'll wrap it up. Oh, yes. go ahead, Bob.
Well done.
Just another question. What was the ethnic traditions of St. Augustine and St. Francis? Like, was it like Irish?
Oh, okay, the ethnic divisions there, yeah, okay. All right, St. Augustine's on Toa Hill was a mixture, okay? Probably heavy on Irish, I would say, but a mixture. I don't believe it was identified in just one particular ethnic group, okay? And what was the other one you asked me about?
St. Francis.
Okay, St. Francis, oh yeah, I meant to mention that before. That would have been identified with the Lithuanian community. Yeah, so St. Francis was identified mostly with the Lithuanian community.
And then when St. Anne's closed, a number of people from St. Anne's joined St. Francis. There's a lot of intermarriage between Lithuanians and French.
Okay.
In fact, I'm the product of
Yeah,
that.
that's right.
My mother was Lithuanian.
Yeah.
My father was French,
Yeah.
but from Hale.
Oh, okay.
He was an import.
Yeah. Yes. Well, sometimes imports can be very good.
St. Joseph's in Havel.
Oh, yes, I
Which is
remember
now
that.
All Saints.
All Saints, now another merger there that took place in April, yes, okay, yes, okay.
My parish.
Okay, and, okay. St. Joseph's, Father O'Reilly, again, his child, okay, is created by Father O'Reilly there, again, to serve a particular ethnic group, okay. They're Melkite, St. Joseph's is identified with the Melkite, Middle Eastern. And the first parishioners, while he was getting it going, worshipped in nearby St. Mary's Elementary School. The present brick church, I think it's like a brown tan brick, that was dedicated in 1952. St. Lawrence O'Toole, again, the original one was the present building that is now known as Holy Rosary Church, or Corpus Christi Parish at Holy Rosary Church. Dedicated 1873. The new church that used to be at the V there at East Haverhill and Newbury, 1903, and demolished in May of 80 due to structural problems. Okay. And then lastly, for getting to the Antioch St. Mary's now, again, I'll try to wrap it up. Started out as a small wooden church right on Havel Street, okay. I guess they really wanted to get it going January of 1849, despite the fact that there was still no roof yet on the church, okay? The first Mass was celebrated there, January of 1849, no roof, okay? Only the sky as a canopy, and it was snowing, all right? So I guess they just were gung-ho there, and you know, come hell or high water, right, as they say, they wanted to get that first Mass going and get the church operated. Sort of reminds me of Abigail Adams. Some of you know the story when she was First Lady. When the Adamses moved into the White House, November of 1800, after her husband had lost the election to Thomas Jefferson. Perhaps the most enduring story of Abigail Adams is when she would hang the laundry in the East Room of the White House, okay? But it was still roofless, okay? So, you know, again, like with the St. Mary's there, you know, the open roof there, okay, well, we're gonna go ahead and do it, but even though we don't have a roof over our heads here, but, you know, we're gonna have Mass, you know, Abigail Adams, I'm gonna hang the laundry, I don't care, you know, all right, so, anyway. So, and the SND sisters came to Lawrence, 1859, began educating out of students out of St. Mary's, okay. The present church, 1866 it began, okay, then dedicated 1871. And I put that last sentence in because a lot of people have remarked how impressive St. Mary's is architecturally. Built in the Gothic style. You don't see many churches like that, like in this area, okay? So it does sort of stand out. Okay, and two more churches here, St. Patrick's in South Lawrence, okay? Formed in 1868. First church was put up in 1870. The cornerstone of the present church was laid in 1881 and then dedicated 1894. Saints Peter and Paul, another creation of Father O'Reilly. The first parishioners worshipped in the basement of the nearby Immaculate Conception Church. Okay? Children went there for their religious ed as well. And then the church that was eventually on Chestnut Street closed in 2004 when it merged, you know, with Holy Rosary and the others to become Corpus Christi Parish. And it was just demolished a little over 2 years ago, and there's an apartment building there now. Okay. What's that?
Did you forget almost that it was like?
Yeah, you're right. You know, one might forget almost that it was there, right? Because there was that big time lapse too between when it closed and when it was demolished. You know. All right, and just some notes briefly I want to share with you. Just to let you know that I'm still in the process of researching St. George's on Lowell Street by the YMCA, and the Polish National Catholic Church, which I believe was on Phillips and Salem Streets in South Lawrence, and then the Lithuanian Sacred Heart of Jesus Church at the corner, which was at the corner of Garden, next to the Cadadella Funeral Home, and Newbury, right, okay. It used to be a Methodist church, then the Lithuanians had it, now I think it's a Hispanic apostolate, so, but I'm looking into it. And then you can read about nativism. As you might imagine, it was virulent here in Lawrence, okay, with all the ethnic groups coming here, the immigrants, especially the Irish, okay. And you know, the no Irish need apply. I have to say that really wasn't, we have that sign downstairs, but that really wouldn't have been seen in Lawrence here. It would have been mostly in the bigger cities like Boston and New York, okay. And a watershed moment in Catholic Church history in Lawrence during the Great Textile Strike in 1912, what we know as the Bread and Roses Strike today. Father O'Reilly, okay, very influential. Okay, the church here in Lawrence was very much anti-strike. You know, just go back to work. You know, we can't have these anarchists and you know, these people coming into Lawrence here who don't respect religion. You know, they're anarchists. Okay, so Father O'Reilly was very good at organizing things, churches, right, parades. Okay. He organized the God and Country Parade in 1912 in response to that radical and atheistic tendencies there of the IWW, right, the International Workers of the World. Okay, so so the strikers, when the strike was over, had a parade. All right, no God, no master. Oh, as you can imagine, this enraged Father O'Reilly. Right? Okay, so like, all right, I'll get back at you, right? So what did he do? And again, he was the great organizer, right? That's a compliment. He organized the God and Country Parade, okay, involving over 100,000 people. Can you imagine? All right, that was, now Lawrence probably had around 85,000 people at the time, so that would mean like every citizen of Lawrence here was involved, plus another like 15,000 who came in from elsewhere. All right, so that was quite the thing back then. Okay, and then I listed my sources there, so you know where I got my information from. Okay, all right, so I will shut up now, and if anybody has any questions or comments, and you know, if you need to leave, that's okay. If you'd like, and there's a display case with some artifacts from my collection up there. If you need to leave, if you want to take a quick look. Otherwise, you're welcome to stay as long as you'd like. Yes.
Can you speak briefly to the choice of location, either for the Immaculate or St. Mary's, either the first one or the second rebuild, because it's noticeably absent from the common alongside other churches there. So can you kind of speak to what was happening in the city at the time that would influence them?
Okay, sure. Okay, yes. If you know your Lawrence history, or you pay attention to your surroundings here, right, you'll know, and you may have studied this as well or read about it, that the very first churches in Lawrence were all built around the common, right, on the four sides of the common, right, and they were all Protestant churches, right, okay. Why? Well, because the founders of the city were all WASPs, right, okay, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, okay. So they built churches reflecting that. Okay, so it wasn't until the Irish really started getting a foot here on the ground in Lawrence that we got, you know, the Catholic parishes going. Okay, like I went through in my report there now. Okay, so when the Immaculate Conception, the first Catholic church here in Lawrence, when Father Taft and the others there were getting it going early on, okay, and they were trying to minister to the Irish Catholic population, okay. Remember I said that there was a shanty, a rather large one, south of the river and then north of the river, right, in what we know as the Plains neighborhood today, okay. So I think, first of all, geographically, he was trying to locate that first Catholic church, excuse me, right near where the Irish Catholics were living. Okay, and if the ones south of the river could come over here into North Lawrence, great, okay, and I'm sure they did, although eventually that's what led them to get St. Patrick's going, so they didn't have to cross the river, right, okay. But anyway, so because a large Irish shanty was located in the Plains neighborhood, I think that's one reason why he wanted to build the Immaculate Conception Church there, okay, to be right near his parishioners, all right, and potential ones. And then secondly, that area still had some open land at the time, okay? So there was the vacant land there that was near the Irish shanty, but still some open space that could accommodate the construction of a small wooden chapel. Okay, so for those reasons, I would say those two reasons mainly, that's where he located the church. Yes, Mary?
I'll be brief.
That's okay. That's fine.
Not being a native to Lawrence, I came here in 1955. Yes, I'm old, I'm 91, but I lived here 65 years, so I feel like I've been, all right? When I came here, all right, from Braintree, Massachusetts, where there was no Catholic church, and I came here, and here are all the churches. But you realize when I came here, there was not one diocesan parish north of the river. The only diocesan parish was St. Patrick's in South Lawrence. I was horrified. The only other thing that pleased me was we had a tradition of going 7 churches on Holy Thursday. Good Lord, we could walk them. It was wonderful.
We did.
And the other thing that has absolutely no substantial proof anywhere, but makes a good story. When you're up in the hill, and the hills are all around, look out and St. Mary's Steeple, all right, City Hall, Eagle, and the mill are all on the same level. Use your imagination, all right?
Okay.
So that the church, I shouldn't stop going the other way, so that the government factory was not more important than the government
Yes.
was not more important than the church. Makes a nice little story.
Yes.
And sometimes when you're on the hill, take a look.
Okay. Yes, thank you, Mary. I've heard that mentioned from other people
It
too.
is, it's not bad.
About like the triangle, the steeples there, the smokestacks, the mills, and the city hall, and the churches. Yeah. But right, I've heard that story before. The more you were saying it, I'm like, yeah, that sounds
I
familiar.
think you read the story, and that's terrible. I have no back, but it's nice.
Right. Us historians, we prefer factual information, right? You know, but
Look at Joe Belly, it's crimson.
oh, yeah. You know, but yeah, these things make for interesting stories sometimes, though. True. You know. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Seems like with all these different churches, largely based on ethnic, you know, the Irish,
Yeah.
and the French,
Yeah.
and the Italian, do they sort of stay in their own?
Yes.
parish?
Yes, yeah. Yeah. Okay, when all the different ethnic groups came to Lawrence, okay, there were oftentimes tensions and rivalries among and between them, okay? So, it was a fun time working in the mills, you can imagine, okay? And, you know, as far as your pay, like it determined if you were male, female, what country you were from, what kind of job you had. So there was no consistency with the pay, all right? That just, they made it even harder there, okay? Trying to get along in the mills and do your job and all that, okay? So, so their ethnic neighborhoods here, their ethnic enclaves, were like the one place where they could be together amongst their own kind, if you will, okay, and enjoy doing the activities that they did together, like the Polish people doing their own activities, the Italian people doing their own activities, okay? So a lot of the ethnic neighborhoods here in Lawrence, besides having their own Catholic church, okay, oftentimes they had their own funeral home, let's say, that served the needs of that ethnic group, okay, like D'Amico and Catadella on Garden Street, for example, with the Italian population, okay, Rashnicott, Haverhill and Broadway there for the French Canadians, for example, okay. So, and they would also have usually their own hall, some kind of hall where they could gather for different occasions, okay? They would have their own like social clubs as well, okay? The Italians, like the Pontiac Club, for example, okay? Downtown, yep. So, and their own cemeteries sometimes as well, right? Okay. Now, usually in most cities, the cemeteries are located on the edge of the city where there's plenty of room. So with the cemeteries, like here in Lawrence and Methuen, they're mainly on the outskirts. They would not have been located right in the ethnic neighborhood. So like St. Anthony's Cemetery, the Polish National Cemetery there, way out in Methuen by Ellenwood, okay, on Lowell Street there, Lowell Road, okay. Sacred Heart Cemetery, like in the French, out on the edge of Lawrence, right on the Andover line there. You can see it when you're on 495 South, you know, okay. So they had their enclaves, and they pretty much stuck together in their enclaves, okay, amongst their own kind. There was not a lot of mixing here, and they had to work together in the mills, okay, but outside of work, their ethnic neighborhood enclave was the place where they could be amongst their own kind and do the things together that they wanted to do together amongst their own, you know. So, now, I'll just say that during the Bread and Roses strike, of course, right, they had to put aside their differences, okay. Unity was very important, right, to be victorious in the strike, okay? So the strike forced the different ethnic groups to come together in the mills. They had to, again, unify to go up against, William Wood, right, for example, okay, go up against the mill owners. Right, okay, yes, okay, because if they didn't come together during the strike, forget it. Okay, and then of course, the IWW was called in to Lawrence here to help organize them because Lawrence had never seen anything like this strike before in 1912. So the strikers knew they needed professional help, and that's why they called in the IWW. Haywood, Big Bill Haywood, okay, and others. They had the mass meetings on the Company of Common up here, right, to try to organize and plan strategy and things like that. So they came together, if perhaps for no other time, they came together during the strike, so. But, now of course today those ethnic enclaves are long gone in the city of Lawrence, with the growth of the suburbs, So today, Lawrence is a majority-minority Hispanic city, about 90% Hispanic, okay? So, again, gone are those ethnic neighborhoods like from the European immigrants that had been established here earlier, So, for example, like the Jewish people, they were up on Tower Hill. Okay, Irving Fisher, they had their own funeral home up there on Tower Hill. There was the Irving Fisher Memorial Chapel up on Lowell Street, that serviced the Jewish population.
There's also a Jewish synagogue on Hampshire Street.
Yes.
Between Park and Merle.
Yes.
That was my old neighborhood.
Oh, okay, yes.
And in addition to that, I grew up on Exchange Street.
Yes.
There was 4 buildings down from us was St. John the Baptist, Russian Orthodox.
Oh, okay, yes, okay.
That's long gone.
Yes, okay, right. Turn Hall there on Park Street, right? Yeah.
Right.
Turn around. Sure, yes. Yeah. So, but yeah, I think that, as a historian, and even people who aren't, just, researching, the history of Lawrence and all the different angles, I think it's fascinating. And that's what's kept me here for 17 summers now. This is actually my 17th summer here, doing tours, and giving talks and things like that. Right? So I've known Mary now all this time, and Donna and some others here, right? And but I love it. I can't get enough of it. And that's what made me want to do some research, when I thought, oh yeah, 175 years now this year of organized Catholic worship in Lawrence, I'm like, I want to know more, and then share it with the public like I'm doing with you now, So,
You did a great job.
thank you.